Okay, so during the pandemic, I ended up doing a thing where I ended up writing some kind of like 9,000 word short stories, which is like a really useless, bad length to write short stories on because nobody really wants to publish them at that length. But it's what I got. And so I don't have time to read the entirety of any of those, so I'm going to read the first bit from a couple of them. So this first story, I'm going to read a little bit of it. It's called Sad Dog. Walter spent a lot of time riding a commuter train. 90 minutes out, 90 minutes back, 5 or 6 days a week. Every morning, he boarded, sat down as close to the back of the car as he could, set his phone alarm so that it would vibrate when he was getting close to his destination, closed his eyes, and departed the physical world. He'd been practicing this transition ever since his mother taught him the memory palace technique when he was 12, and it took him less than a minute to make his exit. He would then arrive in the inner world, the world that belonged only to him. The entrance of his memory palace was the door to his childhood bedroom. He'd had a period in his freshman year of college when he decided he was too old to still have the same palace entrance that he'd put into place when he was a sixth grader, and he'd briefly tried to replace it with the lobby of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which seemed like a more adult choice, but it had been a mistake. His immersion took a huge hit, and it didn't improve until he switched back. The MoMA foyer still had a central place in his palace, but to get there, he still walked through the closet of his old room, past the twin bed and the dresser, flanked by the yellow wallpaper his mother had chosen when she was pregnant and preparing for his arrival. The back wall swung open into a utility closet in back of the MoMA gift shop. Walter used the gift shop as a to-do list. The shelves were empty except for things he'd planted there, so whenever he needed to make sure he wasn't forgetting about a bill or a deadline, he could just poke his head in quickly and take a look around. He saw 2 boxes on the shelf decorated with wrapping paper and big red bows. His cousin and his sister had their birthdays coming up next month, and he had to make sure that he bought them something. There's also an oversized envelope with an electric company logo, a reminder to set up automatic bill pay that had been sitting there for an embarrassing amount of time. That was all for today. He waved hello to his grandfather before he left the gift shop. His grandfather had died many years ago. Walter's sharpest memories of him were going to his dad to visit at the bakery where his grandfather had worked part-time and getting a Boston cream donut every time. The bakery was here in the palace, tucked away in the east wing, and Walter's grandfather was waiting for him there anytime Walter wanted to stop by. But the front desk of the gift shop was a close enough match to the counter at the bakery, and having his grandfather be here let Walter say hello a couple of times a day without having to make a special trip. The one time that Walter had come to this museum in person, in the outer world, it had been winter. So every time he entered the version of the museum he kept here, he could still feel a cold wind sneak through these sliding glass front doors and hear the salt from the sidewalk outside crunching under his feet. He could smell it. He could reach down and touch it if he wanted to. He walked down the hall towards the east wing. He had a row of bronze statues set up there. Giant busts of the head of the 10 people whose names he was learning right now. Their names were engraved in the marble blocks supporting the statues, so that he could reach out and trace the outline of the letters with his fingertips. And there were piles of little toys on the floor around the base of each one. Sharon Hill, the IT coordinator, coached youth league soccer, so Walter left a little soccer ball near her statue. Michael Reed in Human Resources was the father of triplets, so he had 3 identical teddy bears by his. Walter could reach out and touch the fur, or lean in to enjoy the fresh from the toy store smell. He walked in circles, enjoying the scenery. After a while, he decided to go downstairs. There's a party going on down there continuously, a really silly affair from his sophomore year of college with nerdy board games and junk food. It had been the night he'd met his future wife, and even aside from that, it had just been a good time worth remembering, so Walter made it a point to visit regularly. He could hear the music playing as he approached the stairs. He turned a corner and saw a dog sitting in the middle of the wide, vaulted museum hallway. It was a sad dog. Walter didn't know what breed it was, but he recognized the general look of it. It was all jowls and big brown eyes. A bloodhound, maybe, but Walter wasn't sure. Its expression was so free of dignity that it was almost beyond the bounds of what could be considered real. If you saw a picture of the dog on Facebook, you would have trouble figuring out if it was real or if it had been photoshopped. Walter had never seen this dog before. He stood at the other end of the hall and tried to remember where it had come from, but the longer he tried, the more certain he was that he had never encountered it until now. It didn't belong here, and yet here it was, staring at him, simultaneously terrified and desperate for attention. "Hey." Walter's voice echoed. The dog whimpered. "You're not supposed to be here," Walter said. The dog whimpered. "Get out. Go." Walter tried to think of what else to say. "Get lost." The dog whimpered. Walter strode towards it. "I'm sorry," the dog said. Walter stopped. "I'm sorry," the dog said. Its voice was low and syrupy, like a parrot's, in that the sounds it made seemed only barely adequate to the task of generating speech. Each word seemed like it had been approximated by squeezing a different grunt or whistle into a new, awkward shape. Walter looked around. Nothing else had changed. Every other inch of this place was familiar to him, except for the sad dog. The dog started whimpering again when he saw that Walter was looking back towards it. The sad dog had not moved. "Leave this place," Walter said. "I'm sorry," the sad dog answered. "Don't be sorry, just get out of here. Go back to wherever you came from." "I will go," the dog said. Walter was relieved. He waited. The dog did not move. "You said you were going to go," Walter said. "I'm sorry," the sad dog answered. Walter took another step towards the dog. The dog whimpered. "I will go," the dog said, but Walter didn't stop. "I will go," the dog said, and then it whimpered again. At that point, Walter had halved the distance between them. "Wait," the dog said. "Please stop. Please stop." It sounded injured, and even more frightened than it already had. Walter stopped. "Fine, but you need to leave." "I understand," the sad dog said. Walter waited. The dog didn't move. "If you're saying that you understand, that means you understand that you need to get the fuck out of my memory palace." The dog whimpered but did not move an inch. Walter's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket and he opened his eyes. Early that evening, Walter took the train back home. He set the alarm on his phone, laid back in his seat, felt the wheels turn underneath him, and made the transition. He stepped through his childhood bedroom into the gift shop and waved hello to his grandfather. He entered the museum. He looked closely at each of his displays and couldn't find anything out of place. Not a soccer ball, not a teddy bear, not a single painting or statue. He closed his eyes and concentrated. He could just barely detect the noise from the party in the basement. He kept listening. On the other side of the complex was a wing completely devoted to auditoriums and theaters, places that he'd seen concerts that he could relive. And when he turned in their direction and paid close attention, he could get a hint of the taste of each show, each little bubbled away night of his life. Walter knew that it stretched the limits of realism for him to imagine his hearing extending that far, but he did it anyway. Walter didn't see the sad dog. He couldn't hear the sad dog. He breathed in, breathed out. The smell was everywhere. It smelled the way that wet dogs smelled, but it didn't seem to be coming from any particular place. Walter began his search. His grandfather gave him an annoyed look when he poked his nose into the gift shop and out again right away without saying hello, and again when he ran by the bakery and took a quick look around. Walter checked in downstairs. Depending on the mood he was in, the frozen-in-time college kids fucking around down there would either greet Walter as a peer, fail to notice his presence, or see a guy in his 30s crashing a college party and be amused. This time, he froze them in place. He moved furniture around looking for where the sad dog might be hiding. No luck. Walter headed back upstairs. He tried to think of places he hadn't visited in a while. He took the elevator to the fourth floor and took a quick walk around the Hall of Trigonometry, where he hadn't spent any serious time since high school. He took off his shoes, climbed around on the giant brass statues, felt the slippery, cool metal on the palms of his hands. He looked under and behind and on top of, and didn't see the sad dog anywhere. The smell was impossible to ignore. It lingered for a moment when his phone started buzzing and Walter opened his eyes. He left the train, walked off the platform, and went to his car. He was home 10 minutes later. It was Friday. He made it a point to not visit his memory palace over the weekend when he didn't have to. Probably this whole situation would resolve itself by Monday morning anyway. One thing that bothered him was the smell. eating breakfast, going for a walk in the park with his wife, doing the dishes, going to the movies. Sometimes it was better, and sometimes it was worse. But no matter what he was doing, Walter could smell the sad dog the entire time. All right, and that's just a little bit from that story. Right. And thank you. Okay. All right, and similar thing where I just got time with the first start of this guy. This is called Arrive as Strangers. Mr. Smith had been with me for 7 years at the time that he retired. He'd been a special education teacher for 35 years, and he'd taken it seriously the entire time. If he'd coasted, if he'd stopped trying to do a better job, it wouldn't have had any effect on his life. He still would have known more and been a better teacher than any of the people around him, so no one would have treated him any differently, and he would have made the exact same amount of money. A lot of the time, with the students he was working with, it was hard to tell if he was making any progress. And even if he was able to make progress, it could all be wiped away at any time by a seizure or a health setback. It didn't matter, or at least it never mattered for very long. He did the best he could for as long as he could. It's easy for me to get cynical. I spend my life in a wheelchair, can't talk, have limited motor skills, and have a lump the size of a tennis ball sticking out the size of my head that people who've known me for years still have trouble not staring at. I have a lot to be cynical about, but I try not to let that be my defining attribute. It's hard, and it's something I have to face every single day, and no one will ever notice if I succeed or fail. I can give up at any time I want to. It's hard for me to focus. I start thinking about something, drift away, and come back to it hours later or not at all. The aspects of dreaming that other people are least comfortable with are the ones that make me feel the most at home. There are 5 other students in my class, and according to Mr. Smith's innermost thoughts, there would ideally be just as many staff members, but I've been in here for a long time and I've never seen that many staff in here at once. 4 is a banner day, and usually means that the occupational therapist is with us that morning. 3 is what passes for normal. 2 means the school is shorthanded. The day that Mr. Smith finally decided that it was time to go, the class had been down to him and Lisa for about a week. Lisa was a teaching assistant whom Mr. Smith neither liked nor respected. Reza had been acting up that week. Reza had been in Mr. Smith's class before and had been a handful, but she'd gotten worse when she'd switched rooms. The day that Mr. Smith decided to quit, she'd taken her clothes off and was circling the school, alternately sprinting and skipping, while 3 staff members chased after her, barking status updates into the radio and trying to look professional. All of this had happened many times before. Noteworthy incidents included the time that she ripped an antenna off of one of the cars packed around the building and used it as a weapon. A rapier is the word that comes to mind for Mr. Smith, and leaves before he can elaborate. There was also the time that she got her hands on a defibrillator and seemed to think it was an interesting toy. The assistant principal got the defibrillator away from her with a little help from one of the custodians, and decided to be proactive and hide it in a storage closet so that she wouldn't get her hands on it again. The school nurse didn't find out about this until someone made a joke about it at an all-staff meeting, at which point she publicly ripped the assistant principal a new asshole for about 5 minutes. Ripped him a new asshole was a phrase no one said out loud, but which 6 people working at the school thought of independently. The day that Mr. Smith decided to retire, Reza had left her clothes in a pile next to a tree and was walking up the gentle slope between the school and the greenhouse. She was smiling, enjoying the feeling of the sun against her skin and the commotion of the adults around her. Green grass and bare ass, Mr. Smith had thought, mimicking the words of a custodian that he'd overheard once 2 years ago with regards to another student and never been able to forget since. He watched as she spun around and laughed while the triangle of adults surrounding her jogged backwards and sideways. There was a groundhog that had been spotted on the sidewalk surrounding the school in broad daylight, a thing that groundhogs do not usually do. Probably it was rabid, or at least brain damaged somehow. Mr. Smith tried to figure out how likely it was that the groundhog and Reza would eventually end up in the same place at the same time. That was when he decided he was finished. There's a wooden sign right by the entrance to the campus that says, "Arrive as strangers, leave as friends." It is the first thing that everyone employed here sees as they show up for work each morning. The head of the physical plant has worked here for 25 years and started out as a custodian right out of the Marines. His name is Andy. He has a firm policy of never doing anything in the absence of written instructions, but he makes an exception for the sign. Twice a year, he repaints it himself, by hand, with the same stencil he inherited from his old boss, whether the sign needs it or not. The school year ended the 1st of June. There was a party to celebrate Mr. Smith's retirement, which he tolerated for the sake of the few staff members he still kind of liked, and a series of quiet moments throughout the day with each of the students in his class. When he came around to me, he just put his hand on my knee and looked into my eyes. He felt guilty. He wasn't sure how long it would take for me to notice that he was gone, and he wondered if I would feel betrayed or abandoned. I did feel both of those things, a little. I also felt gratitude and love, and those feelings are the ones I'd have communicated if I'd been given the opportunity. It made me happy that he put his hand on my knee, and that he looked as deeply as he could into me, even if he could never really see me as clearly as I see him. I hold on to the memory of that moment. Memories are my only real possessions, and I take care of them. The thing that I really want to tell you is another treasured memory, but I don't value it for the same reasons. There's a bar that borders the campus of the facility where I live that is a popular destination for the people that work there. It's close enough that sometimes, depending on the weather, I can read the minds of the patrons while they tell each other stories. Sometimes things that happened at the facility, which I'm usually already aware of, but sometimes stories from the wider world. Usually these stories are not inspiring or heartwarming. Sometimes they are disgusting. Sometimes they're funny in an extremely dark way. Sometimes they're scary. I'm grateful that I get to hear stories like that. I think there's something important I'd be missing out on if I didn't have that opportunity. I have a story I'd like to share with you now. It might take a while for me to get it all out. You're going to have to be patient with me. And that is it. Thank you so much.